Hello and welcome to my video for November. Now I have to start this off with an apology because I missed my video for October. However, there were two good reasons for this. I was playing in two insanely tough tournaments, the Isle of Man Grand Swiss and then the European Team Championships, where I was playing board one for the English women's team. Now, these two events combined together made for 20 games of chess and, well, some super tough opposition. But when I signed up for this journey, I knew how tough it would be. And it's one of the reasons I set up my dynamic chess challenge, because I knew the schedule was going to be tough, the chess was going to be difficult. And I wanted to be prepared. And I did work super hard for this. Wherever I could, I was grabbing those moments, spare moments, to study my books on dynamic decision making by Boris Gelfand and working at those studies with the Oleg Pervykov's industrial strength endgames. And if you remember a little bit earlier, you know how I talked about starting new books when I haven't quite finished reading old books? Well, seems that habit is difficult to shake, because I was recommended to read The Art of Peace Play by Mark Dvoretsky, and it turns out by coincidence I had this in my library with Forward Chess. And, well, let's just say I love that book because it put me in such a good mood. Because, guys, I think I might have found my strength. I could solve these puzzles on maneuvering like there was no tomorrow. And, I have to say, it's something very good for ego when you're working through the exercise. And, yep, got that right. Anyhow, out of the 20 games I played, I lost 11. And I won 7 and drew just 2 games. But I have to say, you get on with it, you get over it, and I learned a lot of lessons here actually that still make me enthusiastic about chess. Now, I've organized the material over 2 videos, and first of all we're going to deal with my opening lessons, which covers kind of 3 disasters that I had at the Isle of Man, and then going to move on to middle game and end game lessons that I picked up. Definitely a case of do I say and not as I do, because some of the games you're going to see are not pretty, but we're going to look at them with a laugh and a giggle and hopefully learn. So whatever you do, enjoy. Now, the very first lesson came from my game against Ralph Mamedov in round 1 of the Isle of Man Grand Swiss. And there I learned that every opening idea, every opening should pass what I'm going to call the chessboard test. So what does it mean? It means picking up one of these old-fashioned things and playing out your idea on that. And it really gives you a feel for what you can expect from your opponent, whether you are comfortable, whether the computer's evaluation of 0.000 is in fact correct. Because one of the dangers with just working on your computer is that you tend to hit the space key, the computer suggests something and you go, yep, looks good, and then suggests something else, it looks good, and before you know it, you're gone, yep, and it has gone way over your head, and perhaps you're not necessarily as comfortable as you think you are. If you don't have a chessboard, for instance, you're traveling around, this is where I'm going to come clean. I absolutely love Forward Chess's interactive digital board. What does that mean? Let me show you. Now, I'm using my Forward Chess on my desktop. Now, this is just for the ease of the audio and also for the screen. But normally I would be using this particular technique on my phone or my tablet. And the way I train with openings especially is I would grab an extract from a book, and here I've chosen my book on the Caro-Kann, and White has played the exchange variation and now played the traditional move bishop g5. It's actually a line that's fallen out of favor for very concrete reasons, and this is why I've chosen it. And here I would take stock and consider this position. So I would actually disregard what has been written in the book and just concentrate on looking at the position. And the beauty of forward chess is that it has an interactive board, so you can input the moves yourself. So you can choose to play e5, for instance, knight f6, just saying, you know, to hell with it. I don't need to worry about my pawn structure being broken up. I can play h6 or even g6 is a kind of typical idea. And I have a play, and only then consider what the book has written. So now, after I've come up with my own decision, I compare with what I've written in the book. And here I've recommended knight f6, very active and very aggressive. What happens after bishop takes f6? G takes f6 and then queen f3. We have very critical things going on. Is your instinct, again, take stock, is your instinct to go queen d6, or is your instinct just to go for broke with e5? Analyze your reactions, because, you know, this is a great way of spotting your weaknesses or your strengths. If you had a very aggressive reaction, you know, thought, wow, I can just go for the kill with e5, then again, you have a good feeling for the Caro-Kann, because this is exactly what is needed. And after queen takes f6, we are in need of some calculation, and I will leave it to the viewer to actually find out the reason why bishop takes h7 is not very good. Instead, I'm going to focus on the main line, which is g3, you know, stopping rook takes g2. And again, another point, you know, another point to consider. Do not just look at the variations. And I would also recommend, because we are training, we also recommend switching off Stockfish 10. You know, Stockfish 10 is available on all forward chess applications, be it your mobile phone or your desktop, and turn it off. Use this old-fashioned thing and try to figure your way out through the complications. You know, in this particular position, it's a very, very sharp game, and you would consider the forcing moves such as e5, e4, bishop e7, bishop g7, hitting at the weak point of d4. Now, after a pause, it might have you then compare your moves, your recommendations with the text. And again, it might come as a bolt from the blue, but knight takes d4 was actually possible. I deliberately didn't mention it. Didn't want to give the game away. And c takes d4, and the point is after queen c1, king e2, queen takes b2 check. And it looks like white might have lost the rook, but after knight d2, black can't take the rook because of bishop b5 check. But we have this nice intermediate move of e4. Working in this way, particularly when you're on the go, you're snatching moments to study, is very, very effective, because not only do you understand yourself, but you begin to use this. Now, there is a story to this particular position. I was black against Rauf Mamedov, and my opponent has just played knight e5. Now, mainline theory says that black should play e6, and after queen e2, c space with b5, because there is a tactical flaw with knight takes c6. We can play queen c7 after bishop takes b5, and a very important intermediate move of a6, bishop a4, and white will lose material after bishop d7. But I decided to be creative and follow a game that I had seen earlier on in the day, and I wanted to play knight d5. Now the idea is simple: g6, bishop g7, castles, followed by a7, a5. And in that particular game, it got a very good position very easily. Now, I'm really ashamed to say, but that was my preparation. It just went, yep, I know the plan, I can handle the position. I didn't give it much more thought than that. And as a result of things actually fell apart very quickly. So my opponent took his time and played d4, g6, and of course now play queen f3, threatening mate. You know, if I had played this over a board or with a digital board where I could interact and input moves, I would have immediately thought, well, hang on a second, what happens after queen f3? Am I playing bishop f5, provoking g4? Am I simply going bishop e6? Or, you know, would I be playing f6? and taking up the gauntlet after queen takes d4, because after all, bishop e6, there's queen g4, and I would have realized this, but because I just hit the space bar and went yes, 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 looks good, I didn't think about this idea at all, and as a result, I wasn't sure how to handle it, costing me valuable time. In the end, I went go solid and I went bishop e6. Still under the delusion that all is well, because after all, I'm going to go bishop g7, castle kingside, happy days. The end. You know, black lived happily ever after. Yo, how naive. So white played castles, bishop g7, rook e1, castles, c3, and now the penny absolutely dropped after c3. What am I going to do next? And my answer was I really wasn't very sure, because the traditional Caro-Kann story goes like this. Black develops pieces, black plays for pawn breaks, things tend to work out or get messy, and play develops. That's it. Now here, this doesn't really follow the Caro-Kann story actually, because I want to play c6, c5. Or am I playing a5 and gaining space? I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure. The game that I had followed had gone a5, a4. But here it felt to me that after a5, white can simply go a4, and then still the question remains, what am I doing? And one pattern to remember is that when the knight is on e5, it becomes very dangerous to transfer this white queen onto the king side, h4 for instance, and then follow that up with bishop h6 and some rook lifts. And all the while I have no space. I have no natural pawn breaks, and my queen cannot get to the king side so easily. So I was very much thinking about this, and I just thinking, I don't quite know what to do. I want to play c5. I should play c5. So this is why I ended up playing this move that would come to haunt me. I can tell you this move really, really bugged me. So I went rook c8, thinking, yep, I'm going to get c5 in Grunfeld style and all is going to be great. Unfortunately, white played bishop b3, intending to answer my desired c5 with c4, and I don't care what any computer tells you, this does not look pretty. And yeah, unsurprisingly, I didn't play that. I played knight c7, and after tempting me with some repetition, Mammadov found the following plan. So now knight c5 is in the air. Still, there is this idea of transferring the queen to the king side and following that up with bishop h6. And I still have no idea what I should be doing. So this is why I came up with bishop d5. But in hindsight, you're thinking, well, hang on a second, Jovi, didn't that queen want to go to h3? Well, unsurprisingly, it did. And I was very proud of myself because I found this very creative move of a5. The whole point was that after knight c5, I had the fabulous knight a6 planned. And it looks like you might say to me, well, knight takes a6, b takes a6, and you've got double a pawns. But the advantage of opening up the b line really outweighs these two bad pawns. I mean, just think, a rook on b8 is going to cause problems, and these two pawns are not weak by themselves because they have a lot of undermining capacities. You know, you can think that b3 can be undermined by a4, a b4 can be undermined by a6, a5. So a lot of play for double pawns. My opponent doesn't go into that, and instead shows why he's 26-45. And instead played a much more aggressive move. And I'm going to give you, the viewer at home, a chance to spot it. So pause your computer now. And of course plays bishop g5. Now the elementary tactical point is that after rook e8, bishop takes e7. And I cannot play rook takes e7 because my rook on c8, you know, that piece that has haunted me is on prise. Yeah. So I probably should maybe just accept that I've blundered a pawn and this hasn't been a very successful opening. But I was trying to find my way out of this mess, and after bishop g5, I spent a long time here and made a gross miscalculation. With shaking hand, because I played knight takes c5 and bishop takes e7, and only after he took my queen did I realize, no, my rook on c8 is en prise. Oh! And after bishop e6, just simply rook takes e6, and that is it. Game over. Now we're going to look at my second round game from the Isle of Man Grand Swiss, and I was playing black against Andrei Esipenko. Now we reached the fallen position in the advanced variation, and I played a very wait and see approach. I put my knight on e7, d7, and the queen goes to c7. Now this looks ugly. I'll be the first to admit that it doesn't kind of fill the kind of brief in terms of harmony, but what is the point of doing all these things? Well, white has just played a4, which actually tells you white's intentions on the spot. White wants to take as much space as possible. He can do this in very many ways. He can go a4, a5. Another way to take space is to play c2, c4, and the argument there, especially when the white pawn is on a5, is that black really is so cramped that they will never get a piece to d5. And if they do, well, who cares? Because it's just one square and the rest of the army is just squashed flat. Another way to see space for white is to go knight e1 and pawn storm and grab space there. So after a4, I played the rather unusual rook d8, and the whole point is to deter white from playing c2, c4. And after c3, a6, a5, I played g5. Now, what I want to do here, and which is kind of really in keeping with the philosophy of the game, is I want to go with knight c8. I want to get ready for a potential opening with c6, c5. Now, didn't quite want to play this because after knight h4, I felt that there would be a lot of drama after bishop e7 and f5. Although this is perhaps unclear. Now, the move that I chose after a5 was I went g5. Very aggressive, very dynamic. And okay, I'm going to go bishop g7, followed by f6 if you let me. There is a problem with this dynamic move, and it's always the case when you advance the pawn to g5, is that it becomes very clear how white should continue. White, of course, wants to open lines in order to hunt down my king on e8, which is looking very shaky, for want of a better word. And my opponent, I'm not joking, he literally sat up in his chair and he was like, hey-oh. And it didn't take him too long to play knight e1. Now, there is a kind of rule in the Caro-Kann advanced positions. When your opponent plays knight e1, this is a signal for black to play c6, c5. So I don't like to break this type of strategical rule, so I played c8. And he played without thinking f4, and I locked down the position, knight to d2. And we have a very strange situation here where all our minor pieces are in the most awkward squares possible. You know, it was knight e1, knight d2, bishop was on c1, it's blocked. And I have, I don't have the best minor pieces either. And now in this kind of Shakespeare tone, to take or not to take? That was my question. And I ended up playing g takes f4, which I think anyone who plays the French defense would immediately have shouted at me, no, what are you doing? Of course, the best thing for me to do is to extend my philosophy of wait and see and keeping the tension, and simply played bishop g7. And if white plays knight df3, then I should again not throw caution to the wind and play f6. This is so in keeping with a French position. And e takes f6, knight takes f6, and you give up this pawn and you get this amazing counterplay. I mean, just look, my knight is beautifully placed on e4. I have suddenly great pieces. Rook on h7, and you know, they open the missing pawn really doesn't matter that much because I can always hide my king castle by hand and put the king on d7 and c8. Yes, that was the way to go. Lesson learned. But if we go back to my game after knight d2, I played the howler of a move, which is pawn takes pawn. And suddenly the rook, from having no role, has a great role. But what's worse, and this is the bit that I didn't actually spot, was that this knight on d2 becomes a killer. And you can see its path there. So after bishop g7, I thought all was great. And knight f1 came like a cold shower. And as you can see, knight g3, knight h5. And I don't really want to show you the next because it gets a little bit embarrassing. But okay, I'll show it to you because it just goes to show how lost you can get when you go into this myriad of variations and you just don't see a way out. And knight f8. And all the time I was thinking about king safety. King safety, my king is in such big trouble, how to get it out of there. And that's why I hit upon this plan, which I think the most complimentary thing I'm going to say is that it's creative. You know, you got to be creative. And rook f1, and I came up with king d7. Which is, you know, after knight takes f5, e takes f5, g4, I think I reached the point of no return. Yep. Keep the tension, be consistent with your opening strategy. Now, my third and final lesson comes from my 6th round game against D. Kukash at the Isle of Man Grand Swiss. Here I am playing black, and my opponent has surprised me by playing the advanced variation. Now, we saw in my second lesson that against the advanced variation, I had earlier adopted a more flexible wait and see approach. I had played knight d7, h6, followed by queen c7, and waited it out. A very, very tense trench warfare game there. But because my opponent had surprised me, and I had seen in the database he had never ever played the advanced variation before, I thought now is the time to play something a lot more confrontational and perhaps less in keeping with the positions that I'm used to. So I decided to break out with c5. Now, what is the point of breaking out with c5 after I've played my knight to e7? Well, there is a deep point, and the deep point is that I would rather get my e7 knight out of the way of the bishop on f8 and place it on c6. Now, this works in every single variation except after d takes, c4, pawn takes, knight c3, one is obliged to go knight bc6. This is considered the main line, and my opponent didn't know the theory and started to take his time. And after c5, he reacted with knight a3, and immediately I picked up my e7 knight, put it on c6, and mentally did a little happy jig because I felt, you know, I had already achieved something. That, you know, I'd got my knight, which was in the way in e7, out of the way to c6. Now, I was fully expecting him, because he didn't appear like he knew the theory, to play something very solid with c3, and then I thought, well, now I have an easy game. I have won the opening contest. But no, my young opponent played c4. And he thought, game on, challenge accepted. And now we have a very, very sharp position. What to do in such sharp positions? Well, there's one feature with the knight being on a3, and that is that it can no longer go to c3, obviously. And this allows me then to protect the center with bishop e4 and also to have some additional threats with bishop takes knight. So it is really a kind of situation where the pressure is piling on in the center. It's either going to sizzle or the game will fizzle out into a draw. And my opponent, again, played in the most aggressive form with knight b5. And you can see the arrows are going a little bit crazy because so much is happening here. There's so many captures at stake. And black is threatening, bishop takes, knight, followed by capture on d4. White is looking at getting maximum development into the, you know, with bishop g5. And let's not forget that that knight is on my side of the board. You know, you should always split the board mentally in two. And the 5th rank and below, that belongs to black, and black should really start to be territorial about it and go, that's mine. You know, that's kind of inspired by how my 2-year-old niece behaves, you know, very possessive. And you should also be the same when it comes to your chess pieces. Don't be generous. And how to react against knight b5. So the first instinct, if you're being like said territorial toddler, is to think about playing a6. Another instinct is that we can see from the arrows that white is threatening bishop g5. So a very safety first approach would be to play bishop e7. No knight is come to g5. No bishop is going to come to g5. And instead, we are going to play chess. Now, I rejected this. And I have to confess, failing lesson 1 again. I didn't quite recall my notes. And after dc5, I was calculating bishop takes c5. And then I thought, well, white gets the piece anyway to g5. However, as my notes pointed out, the correct move is castles. And this is also, again, why you should really interact and get familiar with your chess variations, especially when the continuations are not necessarily the most natural moves. After castles, I just thought, well, what happens after knight d6? And look at that knight. Isn't it beautiful? You know, we're talking about that territorial toddler. Well, it's it's an overdrive now. But in fact, the center is actually far from stable. And with knight d7, knight takes b7, queen b8, c takes d5, bishop takes d5. And you can see this knight d6, knight takes c5. White really has no way to maintain. And, you know, I also have rapid development. White doesn't actually, despite all that, that little foray has cost him valuable time. And yeah, failure of lesson 1. So I should have played that. And in fact, my notes went bishop e3, and after knight d7, knight d6. Again, it looks super impressive, but after b6, the center falls apart quite quickly. After knight d2, knight takes c5, knight takes, and these two knights are very impressively placed. You know, black is absolutely fine. But I didn't play that, and I ignored all those rules in my book, and I ended up playing knight d7. So I let a bishop get to g5. Now, as if I had been paying attention to my lesson 2, I would have said, well, what is the philosophy of this opening? What have I done? Well, every single move that I've played has been towards this maximum pressure in the center. I have sacrificed development. I've moved my pieces twice. I moved my bishop twice to get to e4, twice to get to put a knight on c6, and even pushed my pawn twice to get to c5. So I've wasted a lot of time, all for this idea of pressure in the center. So what I should do, I should of course play queen b6 and, you know, stick with that strategy. After queen b6, the best move is probably rook c1, and after dc4, the situation again becomes tense. Knight d2, bishop d5, and after bishop takes, this is key, and it looks like white's going to get a good position after bishop takes bishop, but queen takes b5 saves the day. And going back to bishop g5, I played a move that is kind of more in keeping with my previous game, you know, a very passive choice of queen b8. And my opponent played rook c1. Now, again, what are these pieces doing on my side of the board? Which one should I kick out? Well, you should always try and kick out the one that's most dangerous. And in this particular situation, because of the threats of knight d6 and the queen being so passively placed, and because we want that pressure on the center, it is the b5 knight we want out. And of course, I should be going a6, because after knight c3, I can go c takes d4. And after knight takes d4, I can even go queen takes e5. So, yeah, definitely should be doing this. Instead, now I played dc4, and you remember how in game 2 my opponent jumped up because he had a clear-cut plan? Well, my young opponent did exactly the same. He jumped up because it takes no genius to see that suddenly a knight can come to c4, and wait, that is a juicy square on d6. Yeah, he jumped up and immediately played bishop d2, and I immediately went, what am I doing? And after bishop d5, bishop takes c4, only now do I attack my most annoying piece and play a6. But too little, too late. And of course, why go back when you can go forward? And bishop takes d6, bishop takes d5. Now here I should just suck it up and play bishop c7, but I must admit I was a little bit terrified about bishop takes e6, because after f takes e6, queen comes out and gives a check, and g6, queen h6, and it looks incredibly scary because queen g7 is coming, and after king f7, well, d5. Who wants to play with the king out in the open? Not me, I thought. But actually, if I had been ice cold about the situation, I would have seen that, hey, there are 3 pieces that can actually come to the king's aid. So after rook fe1, then something can jump to e5. If the queen comes to h3 to give check, king goes to d6, and then after rook d1, then knight d4 also comes and saves the day. And in actual fact, what is perhaps a little bit more human is to play after queen h6, bishop d8, and after queen g7, rook f8, and after queen takes h7, bishop takes bishop, queen takes g6, and white gets back some material. How this is scary stuff, but definitely I should be trying this out. I also have to mention that white isn't forced to go bishop takes e6. In fact, the best move is often the most logical move, and that's just simply to go bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and f4. But I still have chances to save the game. It is not lost. What happened next? There's no word for it other than it's just a complete catastrophe with 0 chances of survival. You know, you just got to make the best of a bad job. And after bishop takes bishop, I played e takes d5, and I was like, what? Why did I do that? I don't know. And after pawn takes bishop, I played knight takes d4. I did realize that queen takes d6 is pretty hopeless after rook e1 check. King is forced to go to f8, and pawn takes c5. And it doesn't look like it's that bad, but it really is horrendous after queen g6, knight f3. And the pawn on d5 will fall. The king is forever on f8. No, it's not good. I mean, it's better than what I did, but, you know, it's not great. I played knight takes d4, and it's just such elementary stuff that happened next. Rook e1 check, and knight e6 doesn't really help me because of bishop e7. Instead, I chose king f8, but, you know, after knight f3, my opponent by this time is just blitzing out the moves. I mean, they're really not difficult to spot. You know, the position I can just resign this position with a good conscience, you know. So that concludes my opening lessons from October. Lesson 1, familiarize yourself with your opening. Get your chess set out and get practicing. Lesson 2, understand the nature of your opening. If it's a closed wait and see a policy you're adopting, then be consistent until the time is right. Same goes if you choose an aggressive approach, then understand that you need to keep applying pressure until your king is in safety. And lesson 3, don't let your opponent nest their pieces on your side of the board, not without good reason. As you saw, things can go wrong very quickly. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you guys in part 2. Bye bye.